Thank you very much. It's great to be here. It was really good having those introductions too, and especially listening to Bilal talk about AI and the different types of AI and how different parts of it can come together. It is at a magic state at this moment. As we said, I work for the Academic Health Science Networks. I work locally in Kent, Surrey, Sussex as an AI advisor, but I also have a national role of collaborating across all 15 academic health science networks on AI. There are 15 of us across the country. If you haven't gotten in touch with your AHSN, there's lots of different projects that we can work on together with you. In particular, related to AI, we run something called an innovation exchange. So we bring partners together across the health and care ecosystem. That includes clinicians and providers, funders of care, industry partners, academia, you name it, to collaborate in this space. Innovation exchange is across everything, not just AI. It could be a very simple, non-technical scale and spread as well. We also do real-world evaluation work, which I think is important. I'm going to talk about a lot in this presentation related to regulation, because AI seems so not accessible, but it can be accessible to you depending on what your intention to implement is. As I said, we're also honest brokers, so in a lot of cases you'll hear about some funding opportunities from NHSX that you can get involved in. We can always help you with that. And from a policy standpoint, we've been working very closely with NHSX and others on AI policy in that space, hence some of the reports that we've contributed to. I've been asked to talk about regulation. Regulation is always a bit of a tricky area in terms of new technologies. So we've got Elon Musk, who you know from Tesla. He's quite involved in AI, also runs SpaceX, talking about the need to regulate AI. It's something that we think a lot about in the medical space, clearly. But a lot of the fears are sort of reticent of fears we've had in the introduction of other technologies. So if you look back in time in the Industrial Revolution and other eras, we've had different reactions. So you've got the printing press, for instance. You had the Vicar of Croydon complaining about how the printing press would destroy faith if people started reading widely. The Ohio School Board was quoted about steam engine train technology leading immortal souls to hell. Then you've also got the telephone line, or telegraph lines. Bilal talked about magic. What about these sparks carrying messages across the telephone lines? Is that something demonic? In all cases, it took a little while to figure out what was happening and to regulate it appropriately. But some of the lessons we can apply to our journey in AI in the medical realm really is that we really need to look at the effects of the technology rather than the technology itself. So in the case of the steam engine, for instance, and the steam-run railroad, we didn't look at regulating the tracks and switches of the railroads, but we actually looked at safety, and we looked at rates and other areas. And so for AI, it's a wide range of things we need to be looking at. But as you look at AI, you need to really start thinking about, is it privacy, is it workforce safety, and AI taking decisions on its own. I think we agreed in the first session that was not what we were looking to do in this case. We're looking at this augmenting intelligence, assisting people in taking the right decisions. So delving into the medical realm to give you a bit more context as well. Regulations are usually quite a slow process. Clinical trials are slow, and that's because we really want to get a strong product in there. So you take a pharma example, it can take up to 12 years to get from a molecule to a medicine that's approved by the FDA or equivalent regulators across the globe. And that includes three rounds of clinical trials. It's something where you have a product that's standard and it doesn't change anywhere around the globe. And this is so important for medicine. And I think we talked about how we can't really be affording to make mistakes. In the medical device realm, we've got some similar sorts of regulatory experiences. So we've got CE marking, which is able to show where a medical device it conforms with the medical device regulations in the EU. So the equivalent is the FDA in the US. And then also, they're starting to look at software as a medical device. So again, looking at how that might be regulated. But in this market, actually, AI sort of turns everything on its head. So if you're looking at how AI medical devices or innovations, AI-enabled solutions are regulated in the UK or globally, it's an emerging market. And it's an area where the UK is actually leading, thanks to a lot of good work by Indra Joshi and Jess Morley and others at NHSX. But AI, it is a bit tricky. So right now, we're really looking at a diverse group of regulators and statutory bodies. There are 5 that are named. There's an NHSX AI report, which I contributed to. That's on the NHSX website. I encourage you to read it if you want detail on the regulatory pathway. But you've got, if you're looking at clinicians, you've got the General Medical Council, and then also all the other clinical regulators under the Professional Standards Authority. But you've also got players like the CQC and the ICO. We mentioned the MHRA and the HRA, so there are quite a few there. And then from the statutory body, and Bilal mentioned NICE and the evidence standards. So there are quite a few out there. But we have to stress with AI, when you have algorithms that are changing and you have models where you're updating the results quite quickly, it is challenging because sometimes the algorithms will be learning in real time, and you don't have that static example that I showed you in the pharma industry. So we need to figure out a way to adjust with that, which is what happens when we have new technologies. And the way that NHSX is helping with this is they're putting out very soon a self-assurance portal that will help you sort of bring together all these different elements that you need to be thinking about when you're innovating with AI. So if it's an area where you're really looking to make sure that you're operating in a safe way as a clinician or as someone who's in a hospital, et cetera, or if you're an innovator who's developing AI and you want to make sure you're compliant with all of these myriad laws and regulations, it will be a really good place to go. There's already, I've got a link there where you can go and look at the code of conduct already. It starts with some simple principles, really around designing any AI solution around the problem, and that's really getting in deeply into what's, what the needs of the patients are, or the citizens and carers, and then as clinicians, what types of problems that you need solved to release time for you to care. There's also advice on GDPR and information governance regulations, the MHRA CE marking that we mentioned earlier, and then also some areas where we're doing new work, and those are principles, I believe, 7, 8, and 10. So Bilal talked a lot about algorithmic transparency, so there's some really good work being done on that, and you'll be able to see that in the assurance portal. 8 is generating evidence for effectiveness. So that's the work that we mentioned on the NICE, work with NICE. And then also 10 is defining the commercial model. So in a lot of cases, what's really preventing AI from being able to be developed and made reliable in the first place is being able to make sure that they have a market in the future. So we've got all of these regulations and areas where we can help make sure that it's safe, but what do we do in the meantime? I think you're all here probably because you're interested in AI and trying to answer the question, is AI going to help me in my job as a gastroenterologist provide better care for patients? And what, how can I start in this new area, making sure that I'm operating in a safe way? And one way that we do that is by working in a real-world environment and real-world evaluation. I mentioned AHSNs do this, but there are other ways to connect with people who will help you do that. So what we're really doing is taking taking an innovation and making sure that that works in an environment that it's set into. So if you have an algorithm, it could be trained on data from abroad that might be biased and not appropriate for your environment. And also you've got your own sort of implementation issues, has the pathway changed, et cetera. So we're talking about collecting data and making a very strong case for being able to provide some evidence that that works in that environment. In order to get that, you've got to have a group together with an intention to implement that and who has time to test that. A lot of times it requires double running and the capacity to deliver that. And also planning, because it's always tricky. You'll always end up finding something that maybe you hadn't expected before. And the nice thing about real-world evaluation is that you're able to provide evidence that will help them improve that solution and also help scale up and spread. So if we create an ecosystem, which we're looking to do in terms of testing infrastructure across the UK, so the life sciences industrial strategy, the NHS long-term plan, the Accelerated Access Collaborative, and others are all calling for this testing infrastructure. If you're testing one thing and what you learn, we can share with others. So that's the real opportunity here in the UK. So what do you need to be doing if you are looking to set up one of these testing infrastructures? What do you need to be thinking about? One of the big pain points we found from innovators, apart from the problem definition in the first place that I talked about earlier, is the access to data. So it's just making sure that you have a clear route for innovators to access data that is in an ethical, transparent way that meets all the standards, and also provides data along that whole pathway in real time. So that's going to be really important. Also that you have clear clinical leadership and some training in other areas. So procurement is an area, and also HR, where HR and procurement professionals aren't really used to innovating in this area, and quite often come up with blocks that don't really need to be there. So it's really, how do you make some sort of one-stop shop for people who are looking at, let's say maybe it's an ICS area, or perhaps it's just your provider that wants to implement in that area. How do you make that as easy as possible to plug these things in and as safe as possible? So going back to ethics, what are your ethical rules? How are you making sure that you get your ethics approvals and that they're done to a high standard and that things are safe? And also finance. I think there's a recognition that until some of these innovations are not going to be CE marked for a while. Maybe you're helping to get it to the point where they get that sort of clinical trial and you're able to implement. So if it's in that case, you might need to run the normal service and have that run in parallel and then be able to compare until you get something that's reliable and that you know that you can introduce into the patient population. And then also a mechanism for really measuring benefits. So the people who are paying boards are going to want to know, what are the cost savings? Do you have better outcomes, et cetera? So being able to quantify that and learn the lessons where it doesn't work, that's as important as what works, is going to be so important for all of us. In terms of the adoption curve, so this right here is the adoption curve for AI. I think some of you who are already very forward in terms of wanting to innovate will find that, very positive, and you'll see desire to implement here is very positive, and actual adoption is very high in this area. But then in that case, you might not need quite as much evidence, and you can work with the earlier innovations that perhaps are less on the road to getting their CE mark, et cetera. But again, you've got to have that safety valve in place. And then some of you probably just don't want to be first movers. Perhaps you want to learn the lessons from the others. So I think that's okay. Just need to kind of know which part you're in and how you're going to address that. And then my final comment really is around the UK being a world leader in AI. So we are that way. I mean, the Code of Conduct is quite an innovative document. It's been emulated and built upon by people around the globe. It's our job to try to put all of this together, and smart regulation and looking at an agile way to not stop innovation, but just to make sure that we have that framework. So we've got the sweet spot where clinicians can trust and patients can trust that it's been done in an ethical, safe way is really going to put us in a leadership position and help us propel us to the top globally. Thank you very much.